introduction. What's going on, everyone? I'm Carlos.
And I'm Emra.
And we are going to talk about formations today. Welcome to One Touch. Let's get right into it. You've probably have heard of formations, maybe in other sports, maybe in soccer. And you've probably heard systems like 4-4-2, 4-3-3. But what do they really mean? What is the relevance of these numbers and formations in soccer? That's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to get into, number one, we're going to introduce formations. Then we're also going to talk about the historical of formations, and then why they're important, and then probably break down the formations throughout the video, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the video, we'll kind of explain the importance of it, but just as we go through, we're going to hit on those three things. All right. So first, let's go back in time. If you guys remember from our first video, we talked about soccer and how it started in 1863 with the formation of the FA. And around that time, rules were starting to set into place. One of the rules was that you couldn't forward pass as long as if the person was holding the ball. So basically, like if I'm holding the ball and Emra was next to me, I could not do a forward pass. I'd basically have to dish it to the side, and then he could continue an attack.
So very much like rugby in current day. And if you did forward pass, it would be called offside.
Yes.
That would be an offside infringement. Offside now means something very different in today's game, but still the concept of offside exists. But we'll talk about that rule change here in a little bit. But yeah, you basically couldn't just kick it forward and pass it up the field.
Yep.
Which lended to a very specific formation then.
Yep. So this directly impacted that formation, which is the first one we're going to see here. So this formation is what we would consider a 1-1-8. It was a very attack heavy. The goal was to pass it on the line. So you would basically, dribble as much. You had one guy dribble as far as they can go, and then they would dish it out, pass it to the next person, keep going, dish it out, pass it to the next person, and continue on forward that way.
Yeah. I do want to point out that the numbers we're saying basically correlate to how many defenders, midfielders, and attackers there are.
Yes.
And one concept we do want to point out is that, you could be labeled a defender, but when your team has the ball, you're basically attacking as well.
Mm-hmm.
You could also be labeled an attacker or forward. And when your team doesn't have the ball, you are trying to get the ball back. So you just don't stop playing just because I'm a forward, I don't have to go defend. No, you're defending as a unit both ways. You're attacking and defending both ways, going up and down the field. The goalie is assumed, everyone, just so you know, that it's assumed you just have one goalie. I've never seen a formation with two goalies. So it all adds up. All the numbers add up to 10 because you just assume that extra player, that 11th player, is a goalie. So 1-1-8, one defender, one kind of midfielder, and 8 attackers. It looks kind of goofy. Even if you kind of don't know anything about soccer, if you just looked at it, you'd just be like, wow, that's kind of a interesting way of putting players. Almost looks like rugby in a sense, or just American football, like the line of scrimmage at American football. You have all the sort of the guards and the linemen that actually kind of defend and try to go forward and down the pitch, down the field. And then the ball carrier is probably behind them or one of them.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting setup.
Yeah. And this formation, I mean, like you said, they go up, they attack as a unit. So even back then, they would attack as a unit. So this would develop to like a 2-3-5 at some point, but still very attack heavy. They would have the definition of their roles and responsibilities. but realistically, you'd almost have everybody just attacking. So it was a very like
Yes.
attack heavy, keep on going.
Yeah, it would slow down the game very, very quickly just because of everyone just running out of steam. They would probably try to run up the score at the beginning, and then after that, they would try to probably defend their lead. One,
Hmm.
because they're tired, but two, because they're winning. They're in the lead, and the other team has to actually score more than them. So, it just lends itself to just kind of a low scoring affair, even though it looks like, oh, they just are all attackers, so they're always scoring goals.
Yeah.
No, not the case.
In 1925, there was the offside rule had changed, and the
Yes.
rule then became that a player is onside if there was two or more opposing players before them and the goal line. Basically,
Yep.
this meant that as long as you are before, if you receive the ball before two players, you're still onside. Which
Yep.
then that changed the game
Yeah.
because that allowed forward passing.
It allowed forward passing. So, your furthest player up the field, as long as he's kind of, not behind the last defender, so to speak. If he's not behind the last defender, he's onside. He could receive the ball.
This increased the number of goals from literally from 1 year to another. It literally increased to like 1,600 goals, and so that was the
Yeah.
the
Out of the season before that was what'd you say, like 4,000 goals scored?
yeah, it was like
So so it
4,300 increased to
increased it by
6,000
like
something.
25%,
Yeah. Yeah,
at
which is
least
which is
20,
what they were
more closer
trying
to
to do.
30.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
trying to do that with that rule, but then that impacted this formation, which then led us to what's called the WM formation. So
Yep.
WM formation looks something more like this. You'd have basically a little bit more of a balance
Oh, yeah.
where
You could
five
tell
players would be
it's just
attacking.
slowly trickling back and forward, back from all the attackers to a little bit more midfield, a little bit more defense.
Yeah. So here you can see it like it's like okay, now we're getting a little bit more even, 5 and 5, let's say. Like yes, you'll have your midfielders still, you have your attackers, you have your defenders, but it's now becoming a little more broken down that way. And then from 1925 till around 1950, this was the kind of like the dominating formation. At 1950, the 4-2-4, which looks more like this, became the dominating formation, especially with Brazil for the next 20 years because of how like almost chaotic it became. And with having two midfielders, they allowed a lot more flow from the mid
Yeah.
out to the forward. So
Yeah.
instead of having so many attackers and so many defenders, you can have now the midfielders, and then you'd have this connection between, or the bridge between the two roles. So this was huge. It was still very attack heavy, I'll say. The goal was to attack still in soccer as a whole. But because then in 1960, a man was like, you know what? I'm a little tired of all this attacking. Let's figure out a new game plan. Let's start to figure out a more defensive strategy. So by
And it was
a man,
probably after playing against so many teams that were very attack focused, and they're probably like, okay, how can we win more matches?
mhm,
And probably just the personnel that this guy had was probably like, he probably thought to himself, okay, I could probably defend better and then try to score a goal or two and then win the match like that, instead of just trying to outscore the other team and just going back and forth and scoring. This guy decided, you know what, we're just gonna kind of, park the bus, as it would possibly be called nowadays. And we're going to play a lot more defensive and just kind of wait until the right time comes, and we then go up the field, try to score.
yep.
So then
So
what formation did that end up being?
so then that formation ended up being a 1-3-3-3 by a Swiss manager named Karl Rappen. The attempt was for this to have this sweeper in the very back line behind the three defensive lines. And so when your team shifted left or right, that gap that was left open between the shifts would be filled by that sweeper. So really, it was just like an extra line of defense that the sweeper had, which protected them on the defensive end. And then they would rely heavily on counters and essentially, moving quickly up the pitch if possible to get their 1-2 goals, and then they would come back to a defensive role. So it was really popular. It worked really well. Carl actually had a lot of success, and Italy then also really liked it, that they adopted it, and then they called it the Catenaccia, or door chain, which developed a little bit further, and it looked more of a 1-4-2-3, which looks like this. The 1-4-2-3 then started to form, or a 1-4-3-2 started to become the preferred formation for Italy around that time as well. So 1960 out down to like 1970s. This was like the very defensive formation. So 1970 comes around, and then what everybody recognizes as total football was born by none other than Johan Cruyff. And his philosophy was, all right, I'm going to have my team, and it's going to be a well-rounded team. And as long as my team sticks with this formation, and they can bounce between roles as much as they wanted to. So the formation was primarily a 3-4-3. And like I said, if you had a defender, defender could go up to attack. Your midfielder would come down, be the defender that's filling in the gap. Your attacker probably comes down as well, filling the midfielder. And all these players were just so fluid. It was just there was a level of fluidity that was introduced in the game, and it caused a lot of disruption because you just couldn't predict who was going to move up, who was going to shift where. And then instead of being a man-to-man coverage, it was very hard to predict that. And then the opposing team had to have a high level of communication to say, hey, there's a guy going up that was my man that I needed to cover, but now he's going that way, and I don't really know. Like now he's like halfway down the pitch. I can't really yell that far out. And so this became just...
So there was a lot of change there with just the fact that, players were assigned a position surely at the start of a match, but that didn't really mean anything when the match started, because they would just play wherever they were needed or wherever they felt they could be used. It took a lot of intelligence, and it took a lot of team building as well, that like the chemistry of those teams had to be very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
That way you don't have multiple players trying to think, oh, I need to go into this little gap. You need to kind of know your role in every situation. Like if your, defender has the ball, what are you going to do? If your attacker has the ball, what are you going to do? If you're on the left, you might not do the same thing as you're on the right, just because, you guys trained for that in practice earlier.
Yep, exactly. In 1990, the offside rule changed one more time. And this, I think, is definitely more towards... I know the rules still kind of shift around, but it ended up being the difference between what was in 1925 and 1990 was that as long as the player is before the last defender when the ball is released from his teammate, then they're still considered onside, which means if I do let's say I pass the ball high and it goes over everybody, and Emra's sitting right behind that last defender, as soon as I kick that ball and he's still behind the defender and he makes the run and meets the ball, and the ball meets behind that defender, he's still considered onside. So
I just need to be kind of, if we're going forward, I need to be facing my defender, basically. I need to just see my defender and just be closer to the ball than the defender is. And then once Carlos passes the ball, I can run past my defender, get onto the ball, and I'm still onside.
Correct.
So there's no cherry picking still. Like that's what offside really defends against, to make sure there's no one just hanging out way up the pitch, and your team gets the ball and all you do is just hoof it up to that guy and he just kind of has a free run at goal. That's just not possible in soccer.
With this changing of rule, this basically exploited that sweeper that was in the back end. So with the ability to be able to pass balls like that sweeper ended up being a weak point. And so you would have like a lot of one-on-one situations, or even you just get past them so quickly and so easily that they ended
Yep.
up creating the next formation, which was a 4-4-2. So what they did was they said, all right, you know what? This sweeper during defensive rotations, during offensive rotations, he would come in, but during defensive, he would return back and they would remain that sweeper. Why don't we just keep him in the play? Why don't we just keep him inside the midfielder or the defensive role? And so then it adopted the 4-4-2, which is today still very used in modern football or soccer, where this is a highly, how would you put it, Emra? It's a very well-rounded formation.
Yeah, it's not too attacking, not too defensive. Very set roles. You kind of when you're playing a specific role, you kind of know what you have to do, and it's not like you have to do too much. You basically just have to do one or two things really well, and you're going to play in that position.
Yeah.
So if you're, one of the central defenders, you have to be really strong, really good at just passing the ball up to other players to make a play. If you're one of the forwards up top, one of the strikers, obviously your goal is to just combine with the other guy and or just score goals on your own.
Yeah. This was very strong on the wings. You had a lot of strength in the wings, so this was very popular during those times. But one of the weaknesses was these two center midfielders that were, if a opposing team used a 3 midfield formation, they actually were at a disadvantage with this formation, which then adopted the next one, which is the 4-4-2 diamond formation. So this, if you have 2 midfielders and then you're against 3, which in soccer numbers are advantage. If you have more numbers,
if you have more players on one area of the field, if you're attacking or defending, it's to your advantage to have more players in that area.
right?
You give up something somewhere else, but usually it's worth it to just have more defense or to just have more attack in a certain area.
Right. So with this formation, this allowed that weakness to be basically filled. And so you would have 4 guys in the middle, and they would be in this diamond formation against your 3 guys that were there originally. And so you're now protecting the 2 guys. But this also created another weakness, which was it exploited the sides, the wings.
Yeah.
So if then the 4-4-2 standard position, setup was actually dominant towards this one as well. So then if you played a 4-4-2 standard, your weakness could be like a 4-3-3 because they have 3 midfielders, but then a 4-4-2 diamond was strong against a 4-3-3, but then a 4-4-2 became strong against a 4-4-2 diamond.
Just revolving. This is where like the chess kind of starts happening.
Yeah.
It happens a little bit later as well, but like here's where you really start thinking like, okay, this team likes to play this formation. Should I stick to what I play with? Should I try to match what they're doing and do it better? Or should I try to exploit whatever they're lacking in their formation?
Exactly.
So you basically kind of have 3 options. Kind of 2, but really, 3 if you want to just stick to what you're doing, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Yep. And then this with that formation with the diamond, what ended up happening was one of the developments that had happened throughout the years was that they basically brought that center forward and they brought it back into midfielder and moved that other center forward down the middle and created what's now called the Christmas tree formation, or a 4-3-2-1, which it itself has advantages and disadvantages within that formation. So all of this that we're talking about, the diamond 4-4-2, the 4-4-2 itself, the Christmas tree, these were all basically like the early 2000s type of formations that were just so popular. A lot of these are still very popular today. Maybe not so much the Christmas tree formation, but still the 4-4-2 diamond style. All of these formations very regularly used just because of how versatile it can be. And then after that, there was in 2008 and 2009, another strategy took place, which was the tiki taka. If you guys have heard of it, it's a very, very specific strategy which utilized and converted the 4-3-3, which also is very universally used today. So we won't go into tiki taka specifically because that's more of like a tactic or strategy. Because this is more about formations, this we'll just look at the formation itself. So in a 4-3-3, you get your 4 defenders, 2 mids, and then 3 mids and 3 forwards. And this also it was a very versatile setup, and it had a lot of, I'll say, positive things about it. But the thing about the 4-3-3 is that it's so versatile that you just have, if you know what you're trying to do with it, it's a tool that you have to understand for you to utilize it properly. And if so, it could give you so many advantages, which, like you said, Emrah, after the formation of this last one, the 4-3-3, you really get a lot of different formations after that.
Yeah, you get a lot of versions of that formation because when we're going through this and explaining formations, a lot of times what you're looking at is basically how the team is static on the field. Like at the start of the whistle or start of the first half, second half, you kind of get an idea of how the team is shaped. How many defenders do they have? How many midfielders? How many attackers? Where are they at? But as the game goes on, you can see, okay, if this team's attacking, they're going to play wider and they're going to have more guys up front. If they're defending, they're going to kind of tuck in, try to be a little bit more compact. And you could almost say they switch formations because it looks like that. It just looks like they switch formations. But really, they're probably just, they just have a tactic for when they have the ball. They have a tactic for when they don't have the ball, and tactics for transitioning, tactics for going up the left, going up the right, so on.
Yeah. And you said it really well, and I agree with this completely. It becomes a game of chess.
Yeah.
And which is why a lot of people love to watch soccer, is because this really is a game of chess. So you have your formations, and because of how dynamic it is, it's always changing. You can start with one formation, then by the half of the game you're in another formation, and by the end of the game you're doing another formation. On top of that, formations alone no longer became an advantage. You had to also consider the team that you're playing against, your team and their strengths, and then what formation your opposing team's going to play for you to be able to exploit their weaknesses with the formation that you're going to have with the team that you have. So it no longer became, okay, I'm going to run a 4-3-3. It also mattered, well, I got Messi on my team and he's really good, so I'm going to do a false 9, which then brought tactics and strategies into the play. I think in 2010 and 11, with Jose Mourinho and Barcelona's Pep Guardiola, both teams used a 4-3-3 formation, but one of them used them in an attacking style and the other one used it in a defending style. And so both in the same formation had great success in very different ways. So
absolutely, very well put.
Yeah, there's so much that we could go into with the tactics and the strategies, but with formations, at least you guys kind of see what these formations look like, so you guys have a better understanding. So when you guys are watching these matches, you guys can be like, oh, you know what? They're doing a 4-4-2. Now I know what that entails for the most part. And then you can watch how the team shifts as the ball moves around the field. They're going to move up the pitch, or they'll move back on the pitch, depending on who has possession and then who doesn't have possession. On top of that, if you're seeing possessions alone, like from a statistical standpoint, technically speaking, they don't really mean as much until you're actually watching the game, because, okay, maybe they have higher possession, but the other team's strategy is to have counters. So they're waiting for the right time to do the counterattack.
Yep.
So
there's a whole lot more we can get into. Yeah. We're gonna make some more videos on tactics alone, on positions alone, but just to give you guys an idea of what formations look like, as well as kind of the history and background of formations, why they are the way they are in the current day. We hope this video kind of sheds some light on that.
Yeah. So that's it for now, guys. Keep hitting that like, keep hitting that subscribe for some more content. And then, yeah, until next time. Catch you guys later.
Take care, guys.